Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Welcome to Textile Talks. My name is Marin Hanson. I am curator of international collections at the International Quilt Museum, which is part of the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm so happy to be with you for today's Textile Talk. Before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about the International Quilt Museum. We proudly steward and exhibit the world's largest collection of quilts and related textiles, which spans 5 centuries and over 70 countries. If you love quilts and you aren't already a member, we'd love to have you join us. Visit our website at internationalquiltmuseum.org. Next, I would like to recognize and thank the organizations that partner with the International Quilt Museum in bringing you textile talks each week. Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. We are honored to bring you this free and inspiring programming with the help of our sponsors. We couldn't do it without their generosity and the generosity of viewers like you. And finally, just a couple of housekeeping reminders before I begin our program. Please use the Q&A for questions, the chat box for greeting others, and survey for commentary and/or ways we can improve. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. The live captions make Textile Talks accessible to a wider audience, but if you prefer not to view captions, you should be able to turn them off. And one other housekeeping note, I think my internet connectivity is a little bit slow today, so I will be turning off my camera. But I don't think that is going to be a problem because I'm going to be showing you so many beautiful pictures today. You surely will not notice the absence of my face. So without further ado, turning to today's program, I am honored to be talking to you on the topic of Chinese quilts today. Although, as you can see, I have inserted a little edit there yesterday and today because I feel like we can't talk about Chinese quilts today without setting the scene and sort of giving you a little bit of context before we turn to the present day. So I'm going to go ahead, I think, and stop my video. There we go. So just to sort of set the scene, as I was saying, I wanted to just give a brief overview of China in general. As I'm sure most of you know, there's over 4,000 years of history associated with China. It currently has 33 provinces and an extremely diverse geography from sort of the desert of the far northwest all the way over to the fertile plains of the east, the ocean side. From east to west, it's incredibly diverse. There are 3 major religions and philosophies: Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. There are 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities in addition to the Han majority ethnic group. And there is a very, very long history of textile production in China, especially when it comes to silk. So today, I will be, before we get to the bottom there, which is sort of the meat of our topic, the Chinese quilts today, I just want to quickly go through some background looking at aristocratic and religious textiles, looking at Han majority folk textiles, moving into what some of the ethnic minority folk textiles look like, and then just briefly mentioning some of the really common iconography that you come across in Chinese folk textiles, as well as design and art of all sorts in China. And then we will, as I say, move into the meat of our topic, which is what quilts look like today in China. So looking at quilting and patchwork, those techniques in aristocratic and religious textiles, we have to sort of start with the apex of Chinese textiles. Aristocratic textiles have always really been kind of defined by their materials, which has generally been silk, and by the technique of embroidery. So embroidery is really sort of considered the queen of the textile arts in China. This is a robe of state, which should also be known as a chaofu, sort of an audience robe for the emperor. This is a Qing dynasty version. So the Qing emperor would have worn this. And one thing that makes it quite distinct is the cuffs, the horse hoof shaped cuffs, which are a design that's rooted in Manchu tradition. So the Manchu ethnic group, they were the rulers of the Qing dynasty. And so you often see design elements that are rooted in their history. And the Manchu originally were quite nomadic. And so horseback riding came very naturally to them, and they often paid homage to that history in their costume and other areas of design. So this is sort of, as I said, the apex of aristocratic Chinese textiles. The emperor's robe would, of course, have a five-clawed dragon on it, like you see here, the five claws being reserved just for the emperor, although during uh, times of when the emperor was not as powerful, those sumptuary laws would relax sometimes, and people would sort of try to use the five-clawed dragon on their own garments, and often got away with it. But technically speaking, that five-clawed dragon was reserved for the emperor. Other kinds of clothing for aristocrats and bureaucrats that included embroidery would be the Mandarin badges, the rank badges that you often see. The emperor, the aristocrats, the whole empire was really run on a bureaucracy, a very complex bureaucracy. And those rank badges would let everybody know immediately where you stood, either within the military or the civil service. And so this rank badge has a crane on it that I believe indicates that this is a first rank civil official. So not military, but civil. So again, embroidery was used so much to very quickly communicate on costume, on garments, someone's status within those upper levels of society. Quilting, the technique of quilting, where you take layers of fabric and stitch them together using a running stitch, was used in garments as well. This is actually a waistcoat or a vest, again, Qing Dynasty. This is in our collection at the International Quilt Museum, and an aristocrat, maybe a member of the royal family, might have worn this piece. The photograph you see there is actually an image of the young boy standing next to his father is Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty. And his father there, the crown prince, is actually wearing a similar vest. It's in the same shape as the one pictured here, although I don't think it's quilted in the same way. But of course, the Manchu people were from the far north. And as I said, they were often nomadic. And so quilted clothing made a lot of sense in their context. And now this specific piece in our collection has an interesting story that came with it, in that it came to us with the provenance of having been purchased by an assistant costume designer on the set of the very famous, I believe, 1989 Hollywood movie, the Bernardo Bertolucci movie, The Last Emperor. So we believe it was purchased at an antique fair or from an antique dealer, perhaps, as sort of research or inspiration for the costume design for that movie, which was really, if you remember that movie, it was kind of over the top, just gorgeously filmed, and the costume design was just absolutely beautiful. So I like to think that this vest has a little bit of Hollywood glamour associated with it. But quilting, again, can be seen in various forms of garments, and these, again, with their silk fabrics and their fairly complex quilting designs, likely were worn by members of the aristocracy. But you don't see quilting very often in the same way that we see it here in the West on bed covers. So, what did bed covers actually look like? This is an example. It's in black and white, but you can get the idea. This is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Really beautifully, again, embroidered, all silk. But what this would be is a quilt cover. So the more common format for bedding would be to have a very plain interior, maybe a blanket, or it could be a quilted or tufted plain blanket on the inside. But then the cover is what would be the decorated, really beautiful side that would be shown. So I guess it's similar to a duvet cover, which is common, of course, in Europe, but also here as well. So the idea of a patchwork quilt, like we think of here in the West, is not really a format that you see or that you did see traditionally in China. Patchwork, as I say, didn't show up in quilts like we see in the West, but you did see patchwork in religious contexts. So this is a statue of an arhat, or in Chinese, it's a lohan. So in Buddhism, an arhat is an enlightened being, and this enlightened being is wearing a patchwork robe. And these robes were very common across the Buddhist world. The robe is constructed, it is sewn together, pieced together as patchwork, although sometimes it can be hard to see exactly where those seams are because a lot of times the same fabric was used throughout, with the exception of sort of those squares that you see here. This is actually a Japanese example, but the format is very similar across the Buddhist world. This robe would have been called a kasaya in India, a jasha in China, and a kesa in Japan. And a lot of times these were made from really beautiful brocade fabrics that were donated to a Buddhist temple so that the priests could make these garments, which were technically supposed to indicate sort of their dedication to humility and poverty, because that's what patchwork kind of indicated, that you were piecing together scraps and leftovers. But the irony, of course, is that a lot of times these were made from absolutely gorgeous silk brocaded fabrics. So there was a little bit of, I don't know if I'd call it hypocrisy, but there was an irony there for sure. These beautiful donated silk fabrics also made it into, especially in the Tibetan context, they made it into sort of altar coverings. This one is in the format of a mandala, sort of a representation of the universe or an image for contemplation. So this is a very old piece. We think it's from the 19th century, but the brocaded fabrics are certainly at least a century or two earlier than that. But you still see pieced altar coverings in Tibetan Buddhism. This is a much more recent version, not made from silk. These would be, sort of synthetic fabrics, but still very gorgeous, shiny, beautiful, and again, sort of in that mandala context or that mandala shape for meditation and prayer and contemplation. So, as I said, quilting and patchwork definitely have been used within the aristocratic and religious contexts within the Chinese sort of sphere, but they just weren't necessarily used in the way we're used to seeing them here in the West. So, shifting away from sort of the aristocrats and the religious spheres, we can look a little bit at Han majority folk textiles. And in terms of patchwork, this was a garment that is still referenced today in China. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it was a Ming Dynasty era garment. So the Ming Dynasty was sort of mid 14th century to mid 17th century. It's called the shui tianyi, or a paddy field garment. So referencing the idea of paddy fields, rice paddy fields being sort of separated in this grid or haphazard grid format. And so the Ming dynasties, or parts of the Ming dynasty, or certain eras of the Ming dynasty, tended towards novelty in fashion. And so this was sort of yeah, this was a little bit edgy, or just it was sort of making a statement for the era, and became quite popular during the Ming Dynasty. And in fact, I can't remember exactly where I found this image, but it's obviously much more recent. It's like a 20th century image. I think this is probably printed to look like Shui Tianyi. And just the look of the women here make me think this was for maybe a television historical drama or something like that. I wish I could remember where I found this image, but in any case, it's still a garment or a format that is familiar to people and gets referenced from time to time. Another area of patchwork that is a common reference point within Chinese decorative arts and costume is this baijiayi, or 100 families clothing, or 100 families robe. And this is a patchwork garment that was often made especially for young boys. And the idea behind the baijiayi was that you would have members of your family or your community or your village donate fabrics to make a patchwork garment, with the idea or the hope or the wish being that through those donated fabrics, the child would then receive the good wishes, the good luck, the strength of all of those donating families or donating individuals. And often they, or at least the ones that have survived, are incredibly detailed and incredibly finely worked, with lots and lots of embroidery. And we'll look at some details of this one a little bit later. This is a very fine example in the St. Louis Art Museum collection. But there are others that I've been able to examine, like this one, which is at the Field Museum. Slightly less complex, maybe, than the previous one. It's just squares put together in a patchwork. The previous one was hexagons, but still really intricately embroidered. This one has very little embroidery on it, but again, it changes up the shape. So it's always some sort of tessellating shape, a shape that can fit together. This one being sort of diamonds that can fit together to create almost that three-dimensional cube look that we actually see in American quilts sometimes. So these baijai were intended as sort of protective garments. And because within the Chinese context, male children were so valued, that is why they were often made for boy children. And these three examples I've just shown you were all made from very fine silks. And so those examples show how this was a practice for the wealthier folks. But I have seen, like, this image from, again, the 20th century, probably late 20th century, shows these garments, these patchwork garments, within a more humble contexts as well. These two young children are wearing patchwork vests, but again, even though they aren't these gorgeous silks, they aren't covered in embroidery, the idea is that all of those patches would represent the good wishes of the people who donated them, or even if it was just the mother who made it from scrappy fabrics, the idea is still there that the patches would lend a certain amount of protection to the children. It would keep away bad spirits, or malevolent thoughts or sicknesses. So this idea of patchwork having protection is pretty has a long history, and it could actually be tied to those Buddhist garments that I showed you earlier, the jiasha garments. Just the idea that these fabrics can hold some power just beyond their physical nature of covering a person. This is actually a small patchwork child-size quilt that we acquired just a little over a decade ago. And I was very excited because I had seen so many examples of patchwork garments, but I hadn't seen one of a actual quilt before. So this one is probably from the 1980s. And it shows, again, just this idea of a scrappy quilt. Some areas a little more complex than others, but likely giving the idea that the quilt would somehow protect the child that it was made for, or at the very least, celebrate the child it was made for. And there are other forms of patchwork that I would imagine many of you in the audience uh, have seen before. This is a photograph, as you can see in the caption, from the early 1980s, and that's really when tourism to China first began. Very few foreigners were in China during the middle of the 20th century, and it was really in the late 70s, early 80s when people started to come to China to tour and to see the country firsthand. And I think one of the first things they saw at many of the major tourist sites, especially in the north, in places like near the Great Wall, or here, this photograph was taken near the Qinshi Huangdi tombs in Shanxi province near Xi'an. And that's the terracotta warriors that so many of us are familiar with that were unearthed in the 1970s. And that, of course, then became a major tourist site. But probably as soon as it was open for tourists, there were people hawking tourist souvenirs. And one of those objects was patchwork. And my very first time going to China, which was in the early 90s, I purchased many of these. This was well before I knew I was interested in quilts or patchwork. I was a history major and a Chinese studies major. So I was interested generally in China, but I did not know that eventually patchwork would become a major focus for me. But this is one of the items I purchased while I was there in the early 90s, and it was everywhere. These are objects that we have been offered many times at the Quilt Museum because I think a lot of people go to China, see these beautiful patchwork pieces, bring them home. And then, yes, in our case, we have been offered a few of them for our collection. So it's something that I think a lot of people are familiar with. I was very excited back in 2013 to be able to meet a woman who actually makes some of these objects, these textiles. This is a photo, this is a piece she made that we acquired from her, and this is a photo of herself and her daughter-in-law holding the quilt. As you can see, it's a patchwork that looks a lot like log cabin quilts that we see in the US. But it also has the addition of lots of very potent symbols on there. You can probably make out there's a tiger who has what is called a Wang character on his forehead. That's how you know he's a tiger, and he's definitely is a protective figure. There are the wudu, the five poisonous creatures, and even though they are poisonous, they are actually intended to protect the wearer or the owner. So Pan Kai Li makes these, and we were actually got to witness her doing some of the sewing. I found it fascinating that the substrate or the cardboard she uses to applique and embroider on was actually taken from cigarette cartons. So she saved up lots and lots of cigarette cartons, cut them into circles, and that was sort of her palette for working. Now, those were all Han majority textiles. So to move into ethnic minority textiles, I just will point out that the purple areas of this map are where many of China's ethnic minorities live, the Southwest. And they make, again, what we would call sort of quilt covers. This is a quilt cover that was perhaps made for a wedding. It's full of imagery, lots of good luck symbols. For instance, you see a pair of fish near the center, kind of in a yin-yang spiral. And two fish often indicate prosperity. So ethnic minority textiles, there are symbols that are specific to the ethnic minority themselves, but they also have borrowed symbology from the Han majority around them. Most of their quilt covers are done in sort of a applique slash foundation piecing. You don't see a lot of standard patchwork or side to side piecing that often, but in this one you do see a lot of that patchwork on the two outer borders. So that makes it a little bit different. This one is quite unique in that it actually has a machine embroidered propaganda slogan on it, which probably indicates it's from maybe the 1960s or 1970s. It's hard to say for sure, but interesting. It's very interesting to me that, yeah, propaganda slogans, which you normally would see maybe painted on the wall in a village or on the side of a village building, actually made its way onto a quilt cover here. So I think that's a fascinating form of material culture. This is a ritual garment from the Yi people of Yunnan province. It's called the Longpo Yi, or the Dragon Wife's robe, and it would have been used or worn by a female family member during the funeral for a family for a person, and that female family member would wear it and would sort of dance and sway to the sound of a drum playing. So it's a definitely a sacred or a important ritual garment for the Yi people. In terms of quilting, you do see quilting amongst ethnic minority groups. This is a Miao, just a gorgeous Miao quilted jacket made with an indigo dyed fabric that's been glazed, and then some resist dyed fabrics for the shoulder, upper sleeve areas, and then just some gorgeous embroidery all along the edges. But you also see quilting in much more prosaic areas, and I'm sorry for the sort of the pixelation of this photograph, but it shows how a quilted diaper, like we have in our collection, we have a group of these, how those would be used in the traditional split pants that children in China have traditionally worn in place of sort of the disposable diapers that we are used to, or at least have been used to for the last 50 years or so. Traditionally, children would wear split pants and just use the toilet that way. But sometimes if you needed to sort of shore up your absorbing abilities, you would place one of these diapers, which was quilted into those split pants. So you can see quilting in sort of more refined uses and less refined uses. So quickly, just looking at some iconography, and then we will get to our Chinese quilts today. You can often see embroidered images like the Fu character on the right, which is for good luck. On the left, you'll see like a round symbol there, and that is one of the many formats for the shou symbol, and shou meaning longevity. Here is a yin and yang character, as well as the bagua, the 8 trigrams of Taoism. On the right, you have an ox, so Chinese astrology, and the zodiac, and the 12 zodiac animals. So the ox being one of them. The dragon, of course, you always or often see a dragon. They usually indicate good luck. And on the left is a Taoist immortal figure or character called Liu Haichan, and he's sometimes included amongst the 8 Taoist immortals, the 8 most important of them. And he's usually shown standing on a frog with a sort of a chain of coins above him, sort of arrayed above him. And so he symbolizes prosperity. This is a really old and therefore important Bouilly quilt cover. And what's very notable about it is, well, A, its condition is sadly pretty rough, but that's because it is quite old from the late 19th century. But also it has the show symbol, which I've pulled out as a detail here. Show, again, meaning longevity. Show has been turned, it's been stylized in like dozens of different ways. So it doesn't always look the same, but you come to recognize it as the show symbol for longevity. I'm going to quickly move through some of these because I want to get to our quilts today, but I do want to point out the two symbols on the bottom of this quilt. Those are both show for longevity. So you can see how it's been stylized in very different ways. So that is going to bring us up to today. I really felt like we needed to kind of get a quick history of quilting and patchwork and appliqué a little bit in sort of historical Chinese context so that we could understand what is happening in China today in the 21st century. So I will just start by talking about the fact that I have been, since 2014, I have been lucky enough to be able to go to Shaoxing, China, which is in Zhejiang province, to attend the China Patchwork Creative Design Competition and International Patchwork Academic Seminar. I've been able to attend, I believe, 3 times. I went to the very first one in 2014, and then I was able to go back last year in 2024 for the 10th presentation of this design competition and academic seminar. So I was able to give a talk at the seminar, but then really what I was most excited about was attending the exhibition of the design competition. So this is organized by the Zhejiang Province Quilts Association, and I am here with Mr. Yang, who founded this association. But the installation is just really beautiful. It includes sort of the professional end of quilt making, as well as a student exhibition, which I think is really great because it shows that in China, young people are also learning how to make quilts. And as you can see, these are wall quilts, so they are definitely more sort of in the Western or Western influenced quilt making sphere. But the quilts take on many different visual looks. Their aesthetics are all quite different. The pieces on the left are referencing that garment I told you about earlier, the shui qianyi, the paddy field garment. So it's kind of interesting, really cool, I think, that makers are looking to the past as well as looking forward. I was very lucky to be able to meet many of the makers, and I will come back to this idea a little further on. But the woman in the middle she is an independent quilt maker, an independent artist. Whereas the other two people I am showing here, they are both university professors. And so I will talk about that a little bit more, but that seems to be about the ratio that I was seeing in this exhibition. About 2/3 of the entrants were affiliated with a university in some way, whereas the other third were people who were just learning to make quilts and loving it on their own as independent artists. I had the great fortune to be able to spend some time at a textile and fashion university. Pang Donghua is the woman on the left. She is an accomplished quilt maker. She has so much enthusiasm for quilt making. It was so much fun to walk around her studio and to see the studio of several of her colleagues. And they were just incredibly welcoming and friendly. And they took me mandarin orange picking as well as out to a beautiful lake to view the sunset. So it's just a warm community that I have had the great fortune to come in contact with over the last 10 years or so through this patchwork design competition. But one of the main, besides just being able to go and meet all of these artists and have a great time at the exhibition, I also went last November to acquire some pieces for an exhibition. And so this exhibition opened in June and will close in a couple of months, December. So this was sort of the fruit of my labor, Chinese Quilts Today, and I'm going to take you through this exhibition and show you. Hopefully, it'll give you a decent overview of what's happening in terms of quilts in China today. I organized the exhibition thematically, the first theme being Western influence. Many countries around the world that didn't have a quilt or patchwork quilt tradition uh, on their own. Many times they have embraced it by imitating Western style quilts. And so I wanted to show a few of the pieces that fit into that category. This one being a very sort of standard, almost album style quilt, but in very much in a modern, almost modern quilt guild format. I know I've seen a lot of these patterns before, so I'm not sure if she was working from a commercial pattern or if she was drawing inspiration and drafting them on her own. But this very sort of typical album style, I think fits into that category quite well. Uh, you also, we ended up seeing a lot of very accomplished machine quilting. So I thought that was an interesting element that the machine quilting has already been embraced and refined within the Chinese context. But again, these pieces both sort of have a very almost typical Western style quilt look to them. This was a very large piece made by the Lansai Patchwork Common Prosperity Workshop, which I believe is affiliated with a senior citizens home and or maybe a like a workshop area. And so they made this really large, gorgeous, essentially grandmother's flower garden quilt. And in fact, in the detail there, you can see that a lot of the fabrics look very similar to the grandmother's flower garden fabrics from the 1930s when that pattern was so popular. So again, it's sort of taking inspiration from Western quilt styles and kind of reproducing them, in this case, on a very grand scale. The next category that I pulled out was indigo. And indigo, of course, is the natural dye has been around for thousands of years, plant-based dye, and then it was synthesized in the 19th century and then became much more very commonplace. But indigo was traditionally used in China a great deal. So I just kind of wanted to pull together some of the quilts that had the most reference to that deep indigo blue in them. This one was made by Professor Zhang Gang at the Hunan University of Technology. And I just thought it was a really beautiful example of a floral um, quilt done with appliqué. And then the flowers kind of are similar to yo-yos a little bit, not exactly the same, but they have that same um, squished up circular shape to them that is so familiar from the 1930s yo-yos. And then this piece was just gorgeous. It's called Shui Tian Yi in Memory. So it's referencing, again, the paddy field clothing, patchwork clothing, but then reframing it in this very almost edgy, catwalk, fashion show ready garments. And I love this detail because the quilt maker actually used antique patchwork pieces that I believe were from his grandmother and reconfigured them into these garments. So I love that reference to the past in a couple of different ways. He's referencing the past, but then again, bringing it very much up to the present day with these, yeah, again, very edgy garments with an indigo emphasis to them. Now, earlier, Jin Jing is a professor at Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts, and I earlier mentioned the fact that many of the uh, entrants and the winners in this design competition are affiliated with universities. And that's not coincidental. That is a matter that is by design. The Chinese government actually has emphasized aesthetic education. They've made an official They've officially emphasized aesthetic education as part of their sort of education policy. And patchwork and quilting have fallen under that umbrella. Those are officially sanctioned sort of areas for universities to teach in. And so many universities across China, from all over the country, not concentrated in certain areas necessarily, but from all over, are now using quilting and patchwork in their own work, and then also passing it along, teaching classes to their students at their respective universities. So this is very much a deliberate effort on the part of Chinese universities, as encouraged by the government, which is very distinct from the way that quilt making has traditionally been passed along here in the US, here in the West, where often it has been sort of a grassroots, person to person, or maybe through a quilt guild, maybe going to your local quilt shop to take a class. So I think it's very interesting. And yeah, it shows that there has been this emphasis, the quality of work, and just the interesting ideas that have come out, I think show that there has been a real emphasis on quilt making. This is an example also in the indigo section. Many of you may be familiar with Boro, which is a Japanese approach to mending. The idea of Boro is that fabric is so important, it's so precious that it needs to be mended and remended and remended, never thrown away. And so Boro is very integrated into Japanese culture. Mending occurs with a sashiko stitch or just a running stitch, but this practice also has deep roots in China as well. And so I love that this piece sort of is familiar to Western eyes in some ways, but it also helps us understand or realize that this is a practice also in China. My next group I called roundels. So just sort of rounded symbols. This first piece being made by a professor at the Tibet Vocational and Technical College. So she's definitely referencing a mandala here, just in a patchwork style. So I think a lot of people are familiar with mandalas, like this example, which is a sand mandala, which of course is made to be destroyed as soon as it's done. Sort of the idea that life is temporal. We're not here forever. And so she's referencing that symbology, the square within a circle, the circle being the heavens or the universe, and the square being the earth. This is referencing other Buddhist imagery. It's actually referencing the caves, in near Dunhuang, which is along the ancient Silk Road. There are thousands of Buddhist caves, the Mogul caves, that are painted just really beautifully. On the left is a drawn rendering of what you can see on the ceiling of the actual cave here. This is cave number 249 of the, I believe, nearly 1,000 caves, Buddhist caves here. And so that quilt maker was drawing directly from that imagery. And we have more sort of stylized or abstract version of a roundel here made by Wang Zhihui, who is a professor up in Jilin. which is far northeastern China, where it gets very cold. But I think this one is just beautiful, sort of radiating. And again, I've often returned to show. There's the show symbol here, as well as the fu symbol, show being longevity, fu being good luck or good fortune. But again, it's in a roundel fashion. These are just images that you often see in Chinese art, but it was really fascinating and fun for me to see them in these quilt and patchwork formats. Landscape was the next category that I approached. Um, this was made by Pang Donghua, the professor I met, along with her colleagues. Her and one of her students made this, referencing where they're from, which is Ningbo, which is a port city. This was made by an individual artist, not university affiliated, and she's again referencing the landscape of where she is from. And this was one of my favorite pieces in the entire competition. Du Liang is a professor at Hubei University of Engineering. She's in the art department there. And I just loved this piece. I love the reference to the sand dunes of the Silk Road because, of course, Northwest China, specifically the city of Xi'an, was considered sort of the start or the end, depending on which direction you're going, of the Silk Road or the Silk Roads, which is more technically correct, the several routes that went across the deserts and plains of Central Asia. And I just think she did a fabulous job of referencing the images and the feeling of the camel trains going across those expanses from China to the West. Nostalgia was another category that I pulled out. And to me, I felt like nostalgia became very obvious in these two pieces. China, of course, is developing very, very rapidly. In terms of technology and society and politically, everything is moving very, very quickly in China. And I think in a lot of places, a lot of societies, when things are developing rapidly, people tend to look to the past a little bit with rose-tinted glasses, or they look to the past nostalgically. They feel like it's safe to be able to look back and look at things that are familiar to them and just feel a little bit of warmth or comfort in those images. So I love this piece. I mentioned earlier that um, most of the people who entered, or a significant number of the people who entered the competition were affiliated with universities. Most of those were professors. By far, the major winners were all professors. But this person, Marin from Hebei Agricultural University, is a student, which just kind of blew me away because the work is just fantastic. It's so detailed. The technique is really well done. She's including so much imagery here. I love that it's a triptych as well. So again, I think this speaks to sort of the rapid development of quilt making in China. I think things are moving very quickly. Just from when I went for the first time 10 years ago to last year, I saw so much change and improvement. I saw such a growth in enthusiasm for quilts. So I just really love this piece because this person is a student. I feel like it represents the potential for where quilts may go in the future. And this quilt maker really, as I said, she stuffed this full of imagery. A lot of it is auspicious imagery. I mentioned double fishes earlier, so you can see there's two fish in the center there. Double fishes often or usually represent prosperity. That's why you saw it on a wedding quilt. You would want to wish the bride and groom a prosperous future. The other thing that you can probably see right away is the number of children, and they're all boys. And the 100 boys playing, or the 100 boys motif, is a very common one. And as you might imagine, it is included as a wish for abundance of children, especially male children. I tried to count all of the ones on here. It's more like 50, I think, than 100. But the 100 isn't, you don't necessarily need to interpret that as a literal 100. It just sort of means many boys, many children, indicates the wish or the hope for lots and lots of progeny, male children, hopefully, to carry on the family name. But you see other things like lotus flowers, which of course are important in Buddhism. The name of this piece is Patchwork Porcelain. And the porcelain part refers to the bowls and the plates and the vases that you see here. Those are paying homage to a specific form of ceramics from this part of Hebei province. So she's really bringing in such rich imagery here that it would take you a long time to sort of interpret every single piece of it. And that's another reason why I love it so much, is that you could spend pretty much all day looking at it. And I did want to include an image of that 100 Boys motif in a different format. This is a kissa or slit tapestry textile. Again, I believe this is in the Met, but it shows the prevalence or the common nature of that motif, the 100 Boys motif. These houses in this quilt, I think the artists here, they were staff members of the Zhejiang Provincial Folk Art and Quilt Museum. They did such a great job of just stylizing and referencing the architecture that is so common in this part of China. It's full of canals and waterways and is sometimes called like the Venice of China. And I just think they did a wonderful job of referencing the architecture that is so associated with this part of the country. The final category that I included, I just called modern. And so I feel like these are quilts that are just really looking forward or are representing what's happening today. Wu Shunxin is a professor at Guangdong Women's Polytechnic University. And this is a really fantastic piece that it's just called Color Block. But to me, it looks like, I don't know, fiber optic threads, or I'm not sure what. I just love the complexity of it, the vibrance of it. And it's very well made as well, with these piping fabrics in between all of the strip piecing. I just think it shows sort of the technical that boundaries are being pushed in terms of technique and aesthetics. Again, there were many examples of very finely done machine quilting, like in this piece. And the last one I wanted to show you, again, I was very excited about it because, well, for many reasons. I think it does a fantastic job of referencing the imagery or the images that you would see in a specific locale or a specific location. This student is from Ningbo, which I previously stated is a harbor. But this is the modern day harbor. Ningbo port is one of the largest container ports in the world. And so I think this student, in partnership with Pang Donghua, her professor, did a great job of sort of encapsulating that vision of modern day China, which is very much based on communicating with the outside world, with shipping products all over, bringing products in. And here is a photograph of the Ningbo port. So I think, yeah, that student and her professor are doing a great job of showing what Chinese quilts look like today and maybe what they could look like in the future. So thank you, everyone, for listening to me. I have brought us almost up to the hour, but I am going to take a look and see if there are any questions that you all have had for me. Okay, someone says, um, I have two quilts that were made in China for the son of our ambassador who was there just when the Second World War was started. I have not been able to find any more information about them. They are silk. Huh. Now that sounds very interesting. It says, I would like to have more information about them. They were offered for sale at a quilt show in San Diego many years ago. Um, you can find me on the International Quilt Museum.org website, and I would love to see pictures. Quilts made around World War II would be very interesting for me to see because I know very little. Sadly, because China was so war torn for the first half of the 20th century, very little material culture survived, especially textiles. So, yeah, please get in touch with me. Um, let's see. Someone says, when you say quilt cover, does the cover lay on top of a quilt or bed, or does it work like a duvet? It works more like a duvet usually. That's my understanding, is that it's usually like an envelope, a fabric envelope that a plain blanket or plain quilt would go inside. Someone is asking, are there any political quilts? Yeah, not so much that you would see. So the context within China um, might discourage any overt political statements, but certainly depicting everyday life, you see that a lot, like I was showing with the Ningbo port. But yes, I did not see anything that was overtly political. Let's see, we have 1 more minute. Referencing the quilt made by Marin, the student, was it appliqué or pieced? It was appliqued. Yeah, and it really, really quite well done as well. So I am really sorry, but we are right up at the top of the hour now. So I think I'm going to have to close it there. I did get the email from the person who was telling us about the quilts made during World War II. So I'll look forward to emailing you, or you can get a hold of me. In any case, I hope you all had a wonderful time learning about Chinese quilts today, and we hope to see you next week for the next textile talk. Thank you very much.